The alarm on Eliza Morgan's phone chimed at exactly 5:30 a.m., as it did every weekday. Her small apartment in the Inman Park neighborhood of Atlanta was still dark, the September morning not yet touched by sunlight. Eliza reached over and silenced the alarm, then lay still for a moment, gathering her resolve for the day ahead. At 32, Eliza had developed a carefully structured routine. She had moved to Atlanta 3 years ago after her divorce, seeking a fresh start in a city where nobody knew her story. Her job as an accountant at a mid-sized firm provided stability, if not excitement. It paid the bills and allowed her to live comfortably in her one-bedroom apartment, which she had decorated with second-hand furniture and plants that brought life to the space. Eliza pulled herself from bed and padded to the kitchen, where she started the coffee maker. While it brewed, she changed into her running clothes: black leggings, a lightweight blue hoodie, and well-worn running shoes. Running had become her therapy after the divorce, a way to clear her mind and prepare for the day ahead. With a travel mug of coffee in hand, Eliza locked her apartment door and headed outside. The air held a slight crispness that hadn't been there the week before, hinting at the changing season. She sipped her coffee as she stretched her legs, watching as the neighborhood slowly awakened around her. Inman Park was an eclectic mix of restored Victorian homes, small apartment buildings, and local businesses. Eliza loved its tree-lined streets and the sense of community that permeated the area, even though she had kept mostly to herself since moving in. She knew the faces of her neighbors but few of their names, preferring the comfortable anonymity of city living. As she set off on her usual route, Eliza felt the familiar rhythm of her feet hitting the pavement. She ran past shuttered coffee shops and restaurants that wouldn't open for hours yet, past homes where lights were just beginning to flicker on as their occupants started their days. 15 minutes into her run, Eliza rounded the corner onto Euclid Avenue, where a local park stretched out before her. This was typically her turning point, but today something caught her eye. The early morning sunlight, now just beginning to filter through the trees, glinted off something on the ground near the park entrance. Eliza slowed her pace and approached, discovering that someone had left a trail of trash scattered across the sidewalk: fast food wrappers, plastic bottles, and crumpled paper bags. She stopped, looking around to see if anyone else had noticed. The street was empty except for a man walking his dog on the opposite side. She hesitated. It wasn't her responsibility to clean up after others, and she was in the middle of her run. But something about the careless disregard for this place she had come to appreciate bothered her. After a moment's consideration, Eliza set down her coffee mug on a nearby bench and began picking up the trash. She gathered the wrappers and bottles, searching for a trash can. As she worked, she didn't notice the figure watching her from a parked car across the street. A man in his early 40s with salt and pepper hair, observing her actions with quiet interest. When the last piece of trash had been disposed of, Eliza retrieved her coffee mug, now cold, and continued her run. The brief delay had thrown off her carefully timed schedule, but she felt a small satisfaction at having restored a bit of order to her neighborhood. What Eliza couldn't know was that her simple act of civic responsibility had been witnessed, and that this chance encounter would set in motion a series of events that would challenge the carefully constructed boundaries of her solitary life. Marcus Reeves drummed his fingers on the steering wheel of his car, watching as the woman in the blue hoodie jogged away. He had been parked outside the park for nearly an hour, taking notes for his latest article. As the editor of the Atlanta Community Voice, a small but growing local newspaper focused on neighborhood stories and community issues, Marcus was always on the lookout for material. This morning, he had come to document the increasing litter problem in the city's parks, a seemingly minor issue that had become a point of contention at recent community board meetings. He had photographed the trash deliberately scattered by a group of teenagers he'd observed the previous evening, planning to return later for after photos once the park's maintenance crew had cleaned up. Instead, he had witnessed this stranger stopping her morning routine to clean up without prompting or recognition. It was a small gesture, but precisely the kind of everyday civic action that Marcus found himself increasingly drawn to as a journalist. In a media landscape dominated by crisis and conflict, he had dedicated his paper to highlighting the quieter acts of community that often went unnoticed. Marcus reached for his camera and reviewed the photos he had taken. The woman picking up trash, her expression focused and determined. He hadn't intended to photograph her specifically, but she had unwittingly become the central figure in his documentation. Back at his small office in Little Five Points, Marcus uploaded the photos to his computer. The morning light grew stronger, filtering through the blinds as he sipped his second cup of coffee. The office was quiet at this early hour. His 2 staff reporters wouldn't arrive until 9, and the part-time graphic designer worked remotely. Marcus had started the paper 5 years ago after leaving a position at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The mainstream media's constant focus on crime, political division, and disaster had worn him down, and he had cashed in his modest 401k to fund a different kind of local journalism, one that celebrated community rather than sensationalized its problems. It hadn't been easy. The paper operated on a shoestring budget, supported by local advertising and a growing base of subscribers who appreciated its positive focus. Marcus had nearly gone bankrupt twice, but the past year had finally seen the operation stabilize financially. He stared at the photo of the woman in the blue hoodie, her face partially visible in profile. There was something compelling about her focused expression, the deliberate way she had gone about cleaning up a mess that wasn't hers to fix. Marcus began to type, crafting a short piece about civic responsibility and the anonymous acts of care that keep a community functioning. He didn't identify the woman, describing her only as an early morning runner who took it upon herself to maintain the shared spaces we all enjoy. By midday, the latest edition was being finalized. Marcus included the story about the park cleanup on page 3, alongside articles about a local teacher who had started a community garden and an elderly man who repaired bicycles for neighborhood children free of charge. As he sent the final layout to the printer, Marcus found himself thinking again about the woman in the blue hoodie. In the 3 years he'd been observing and documenting the neighborhoods of Atlanta, he'd never approached his subjects directly, preferring to tell their stories from a respectful distance. But something about this particular moment, its simplicity and spontaneity, made him wonder about the person behind the action. Before he could reconsider, Marcus wrote a short note on the back of his business card. "I saw what you did at Inman Park this morning. Thank you for caring. The world needs more people like you." He placed the card in an envelope, along with a copy of the newspaper that would be printed tomorrow, which featured his article and a tastefully cropped photo that showed her picking up trash, but didn't clearly identify her. The question now was how to deliver it. He had seen which direction she had run after leaving the park, but didn't know where she lived. As he contemplated this logistical challenge, Marcus recognized the unusual position he found himself in, a journalist seeking to connect with a subject who had no idea she had become part of a story. The following Monday, Eliza's routine proceeded as usual. Her weekend had been quiet: grocery shopping, laundry, a few hours catching up on work, and a phone call with her sister in Oregon. By Monday morning, the brief incident at the park had faded from her memory, overshadowed by the immediate concerns of the work week ahead. As she jogged her familiar route, Eliza noticed a man sitting on one of the benches near where she had cleaned up the trash the previous week. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place him. He appeared to be in his early 40s, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt, a messenger bag beside him on the bench. When she drew closer, the man looked up from the newspaper he was reading and smiled tentatively. "Excuse me," he called as she passed. "I hope this isn't too strange, but are you the runner who stopped to pick up trash here last week?" Eliza slowed, immediately wary. Living alone in the city had taught her caution. "Why do you ask?" she replied, maintaining a safe distance from the bench. The man held up the newspaper he was reading. "I'm Marcus Reeves. I edit this local paper, and I happened to be here that morning." He spoke with a gentle southern accent that softened his words. "I was documenting the litter problem for an article, and I saw what you did." Eliza hesitated, uncertain how to respond. "I just picked up some trash," she said finally. "It wasn't a big deal." "That's exactly why it matters," Marcus replied. "The small things that people do without expectation of recognition or reward, that's what keeps a community functioning." He reached into his messenger bag and pulled out an envelope. "I wrote a small piece about it. I didn't identify you or anything, but I thought you might like to see it." Eliza reluctantly approached and took the envelope, still uncertain about this unexpected interaction. "You wrote an article about someone picking up trash?" Marcus laughed, a warm sound that temporarily dispelled some of Eliza's caution. The Atlanta Community Voice focuses on the small acts of community that go unnoticed. Your spontaneous cleanup fit perfectly. He gestured to the bench beside him. "I've been hoping to catch you again on your run. I've been here 3 mornings in a row." "That's—" Eliza searched for the word. "Persistent. Journalists tend to be," Marcus admitted, "though I promise I'm not usually this stalkerish. I just wanted to say thank you, and to give you that." He nodded toward the envelope in her hand. Eliza glanced at her watch. Her carefully timed morning was once again being disrupted, but curiosity was beginning to override her initial wariness. "I need to finish my run, but thank you, I guess." Marcus stood, slinging his messenger bag over his shoulder. "Of course. Sorry to interrupt your morning. Enjoy your run." As Eliza turned to continue her route, Marcus called after her. "We're doing a feature next month on neighborhood improvement initiatives. If you're interested in sharing any thoughts, my contact information is in that envelope." Eliza raised a hand in acknowledgement without looking back, her mind already turning over this strange encounter as she picked up her pace. The envelope felt unexpectedly weighty in her hand, carrying implications she wasn't yet ready to examine. Later that evening, after returning from work, Eliza finally opened the envelope. Inside was a copy of The Atlanta Community Voice, folded open to page 3, where a small article titled "The Anonymous Caretakers Among Us" was accompanied by a photo that showed her, partially obscured but recognizable to anyone who knew her, picking up trash in the park. The article was thoughtful and eloquent, expanding from her small act to a larger meditation on civic responsibility and community care. Also in the envelope was Marcus's business card with a handwritten note on the back. Eliza read it twice, then set it on her kitchen counter, unsure how to feel about being observed and documented without her knowledge. There was something both flattering and unsettling about it. For 3 days, the business card remained on her counter, a disruption to the careful order of her apartment. Eliza found herself thinking about Marcus Reeves and his unusual newspaper, about being noticed when she had grown so accustomed to anonymity. On Thursday evening, after a particularly challenging day at work, she finally picked up her phone and sent a text to the number on the card. "This is Eliza, the trash picker-upper. Your article was nice. I'm not sure what thoughts I'd have to share on neighborhood improvements, but I wouldn't mind hearing more about your newspaper over coffee sometime." She pressed send before she could reconsider, then set her phone down and walked away, her heart beating unexpectedly fast. Saturday morning found Eliza sitting at a corner table in Dancing Goat's Coffee Bar, a local cafe that she passed often but rarely entered. She had arrived 15 minutes early, a habit born of anxiety rather than politeness, and was now nursing her second cup of coffee while pretending to read a book she'd brought as a safeguard against awkward waiting. The morning sunlight streamed through the cafe's large windows, casting a warm glow over the rustic wooden tables and exposed brick walls. The air was rich with the aroma of freshly ground coffee beans and baked goods. Eliza checked her watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes, wondering if she had made a mistake in agreeing to this meeting. She had spent an uncharacteristic amount of time that morning deciding what to wear, finally settling on dark jeans and a soft blue sweater that her sister had once told her brought out her eyes. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail for work, fell loosely around her shoulders. At precisely 10 a.m., Marcus entered the cafe. He paused at the doorway, scanning the room until his eyes landed on Eliza. His face broke into a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes as he approached her table. He was dressed in a casual gray button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms tanned from outdoor work. "Eliza, thanks for agreeing to meet. I hope I haven't kept you waiting," he said, his southern accent more pronounced in person than it had been during their brief interaction in the park. "I just got here," she lied, closing her book as he sat down across from her. The novel, a mystery she'd read twice before, served its purpose as a security blanket during her wait. So you run a newspaper about people picking up trash? Marcus laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the space between them. Among other things, we cover the small acts of community that typically don't make headlines. He pulled a more recent copy of the Atlanta Community Voice from his messenger bag and placed it on the table. The paper was printed on slightly higher quality stock than most newspapers, giving it a substantive feel. This week's front page is about a group of high school students who created a weekend meal program for their classmates experiencing food insecurity. Eliza picked up the paper, noting the thoughtful layout and the absence of sensationalist headlines. The photographs were striking. Students preparing meals together, their faces showing determination and camaraderie. So no crime, no politics, no celebrity gossip? There are plenty of other sources for those stories, Marcus replied, ordering a black coffee when the barista approached their table. We focus on what's working in communities rather than what's broken. It's a different approach to journalism. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes animated. After 12 years of covering crime scenes and political scandals for the Journal-Constitution, I'd had enough of documenting society's failures. I wanted to highlight its successes, especially the small, everyday ones that don't usually get attention. As Marcus spoke about his newspaper, Eliza found herself unexpectedly engaged. His passion was evident in the way he described transitioning from mainstream media to founding his own publication, in how he talked about the struggles of the first few years and the small community of loyal readers who had sustained the paper until it found its footing. He described the importance of highlighting everyday acts of kindness and responsibility, and how these stories created a sense of possibility rather than despair. The media we consume shapes how we see the world, he explained, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug. If all we read about are problems and crises, we start to believe that's all there is. But I've found that for every act of selfishness or cruelty, there are dozens of moments of generosity and care that go unnoticed. What about you? Marcus asked eventually, after sharing a story about an elderly couple who had transformed a vacant lot into a community garden. What brought you to Atlanta? Eliza hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing her personal history. She took a sip of her now lukewarm coffee, buying time to decide how much to reveal. A fresh start, she said finally, setting down her mug. I moved here after my divorce 3 years ago. Needed a change of scenery. The words felt inadequate to describe the painful unraveling of her 8-year marriage, the discovery of her ex-husband's affair with a colleague, the months of attempting counseling before finally accepting that some breaches of trust couldn't be repaired. But Marcus nodded, accepting this brief explanation without pressing for details, and Eliza felt a surge of gratitude for his restraint. And what do you do when you're not picking up trash during your morning runs? He asked, skillfully shifting the conversation to more comfortable territory. I'm an accountant at Henderson & Phillips. Not nearly as interesting as running a newspaper, she replied, relaxing slightly as they moved away from her past. Numbers keep the world functioning, Marcus observed with a genuine smile. Without accountants, the rest of us would be lost. My business manager reminds me of this at least once a month when I try to understand our financial statements. Their conversation continued, moving from work to favorite spots in the neighborhood to books they had both read. Marcus recommended a local author who wrote mysteries set in Atlanta, while Eliza shared her appreciation for biographies of ordinary people who had lived extraordinary lives. They discovered a shared love of hiking. Marcus frequented the trails at Sweetwater Creek State Park, while Eliza preferred the quieter paths of the Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area. There's a trail there that leads to an overlook of the river that's particularly beautiful at sunset, Marcus mentioned. Not many people know about it. I haven't found that one yet, Eliza admitted. I usually stick to the more populated trails. Maybe I could show you sometime, Marcus suggested, then immediately added, no pressure, of course, just an offer. Eliza was surprised by how easily they fell into a rhythm, how Marcus seemed genuinely interested in her opinions without demanding more personal information than she was comfortable sharing. He listened attentively when she spoke, asking thoughtful follow-up questions rather than simply waiting for his turn to talk. It had been years since she'd experienced this kind of engaged conversation with someone new. An hour passed, then two. The morning crowd in the cafe had thinned, replaced by the lunch patrons. When Marcus finally looked at his watch, he seemed surprised by the time. "I've taken up your entire morning," he said apologetically, gathering the newspapers he had shown her throughout their conversation. "It's been nice," Eliza admitted, realizing as she said it that she meant it. The anxiety she had felt earlier had dissolved, replaced by a comfortable ease she hadn't expected. "Your newspaper is doing something important. In a world where media seems designed to make us angry or afraid, focusing on the positive is refreshing." Marcus smiled, clearly pleased by her assessment. The sunlight caught the silver at his temples as he leaned forward. "Would you be willing to let me interview you properly for that neighborhood improvement piece I mentioned? Your perspective as a relative newcomer to the area would be valuable. You notice things that those of us who've been here longer might overlook." Eliza considered the request, twisting her coffee mug between her palms. A week ago, she would have declined immediately, protective of her privacy and wary of attention. But something about Marcus and his genuine belief in community connection had begun to erode her carefully constructed boundaries. "I could do that," she said finally, meeting his gaze. "But only if you promise not to make me sound more interesting than I am." "Journalist's honor," Marcus replied, raising his hand in a mock pledge. His eyes crinkled with warmth. "Though for the record, I find you plenty interesting already." The compliment hung between them, simple but sincere. Eliza felt her cheeks warm slightly, unused to this kind of direct appreciation. "Well, that makes one of us," she replied, with a self-deprecating smile. As they left the cafe, walking together down the tree-lined street, Eliza felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The carefully ordered routine of her life had been disrupted, but the disruption had brought with it an unexpected opportunity, the chance to be part of something larger than herself, to contribute to a community she had been living alongside but never truly joining. They paused at the corner where they would need to part ways, Marcus heading back to his office to oversee the final edits for Monday's edition, Eliza planning to run errands before returning to her apartment. The September sun was high now, warming the air and illuminating the changing leaves of the trees that lined the street. "Same time next Saturday?" Marcus asked, adjusting the strap of his messenger bag. "We could meet here again, or try that new breakfast place on Highland Avenue. I've heard their challah French toast is worth the wait." Eliza smiled, recognizing the invitation for what it was, not just a follow-up interview, but the potential beginning of a friendship, or perhaps something more. A month ago, she would have made an excuse, retreating to the safety of her solitary routines. But today, the prospect of another morning like this one seemed not just appealing but necessary. "Highland Avenue sounds good," she replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I run past it every morning but haven't been inside yet." "It's a date," Marcus said, then quickly amended, "or, a meeting. For the interview." "A date works too," Eliza found herself saying, surprising them both with her directness. Marcus's smile widened. "I'll see you next Saturday then. 10 o'clock. As they parted ways, Eliza felt a curious mixture of nervousness and anticipation. It had been so long since she had allowed someone new into her carefully constructed life. The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating. Walking home through the familiar streets of Inman Park, Eliza thought about how a simple act, stopping to pick up trash on a morning run, had led to this moment. She had moved to Atlanta seeking anonymity, a place to rebuild her life without the weight of her past. What she hadn't realized until now was that rebuilding meant more than establishing routines and creating a functional living space. It meant opening herself to new connections, to being seen. The neighborhood around her suddenly seemed different, more vibrant and alive with possibility. She noticed details she had overlooked during her 3 years of living here. The community bulletin board outside the local grocery store, advertising neighborhood events and volunteer opportunities. The elderly man who sat on his porch each day, waving to passers-by. The small free library box on the corner, its shelves packed with books left by neighbors for neighbors. That evening, as Eliza prepared for bed, she noticed a piece of trash, a discarded receipt, on the sidewalk outside her apartment building. Without hesitation, She stepped outside to pick it up, smiling to herself as she dropped it into the trash can. This time, she didn't need anyone watching to motivate the act. The satisfaction came from knowing she was contributing, in her own small way, to the community she was slowly becoming a part of. The following Saturday brought another meeting with Marcus, this time at the Highland Avenue Café. The challah French toast was indeed worth the wait, as was the conversation that stretched well into the afternoon. When they finally parted, it was with plans to meet again, this time for dinner at a small Italian restaurant that Marcus had been wanting to try. In the weeks and months that followed, Eliza's carefully structured life expanded to include new elements, regular coffee meetings with Marcus, that gradually evolved into dinner dates, volunteering for a neighborhood cleanup initiative organized through the Atlanta Community Voice, gradually getting to know her neighbors by name rather than just by sight. 3 months after their first coffee meeting, Marcus took Eliza to the overlooked trail he had mentioned, timing their hike to reach the summit just as the sun began to set over the Chattahoochee River. The water reflected the orange and pink sky, creating a double sunset that took Eliza's breath away. "This is beautiful," she said, standing close to Marcus in the cooling evening air. "I've been wanting to share it with you," he replied, his hand finding hers. "Some things are better experienced together." As winter yielded to spring, Eliza found herself increasingly involved in community projects. She volunteered as a financial advisor for the high school students' meal program, helping them create a sustainable budget and apply for nonprofit status. She joined the neighborhood association, offering her accounting skills to help manage the funds for the annual street festival. When Marcus's paper faced a financial shortfall during a slow advertising month, she stayed up late reviewing the books, identifying areas where costs could be trimmed without sacrificing the quality of reporting. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden, but rather a series of small shifts, much like the act of picking up trash that had started it all. Each choice to engage rather than withdraw, to connect rather than observe from a distance, wove her more deeply into the fabric of the community she had chosen as her home. On the 1-year anniversary of their first meeting in the coffee shop, Marcus and Eliza returned to the park bench where they had first spoken. The early morning light filtered through the trees, much as it had on the day Eliza had stopped to clean up the scattered trash. "I have something for you," Marcus said, reaching into his ever-present messenger bag. He pulled out a small wooden box and handed it to her. Inside, Eliza found a silver pendant in the shape of a small, leafless tree, simple but elegant, its branches reaching outward like possibilities. "It reminded me of you," Marcus explained as he helped her fasten it around her neck, growing new roots, branching out. Eliza touched the pendant, feeling its weight against her skin. "It's perfect," she said, leaning in to kiss him. "Thank you." They sat together on the bench, watching as the neighborhood awakened around them. A young mother jogged past with a stroller. An elderly couple walked hand in hand. A group of teenagers gathered at the park entrance with trash bags and gloves, participants in the monthly cleanup initiative that Eliza now helped coordinate. "You know," Marcus said, his arm around her shoulders, "when I saw you picking up trash that morning, I never imagined where it would lead." "Me neither," Eliza replied, leaning into his embrace. "I was just trying to maintain my little corner of the world. And instead, you found a whole community." "We both did," she corrected him, thinking of how Marcus's newspaper had grown over the past year, adding 2 more staff reporters and expanding its distribution to neighboring areas. His stories about everyday acts of community care had struck a chord with readers tired of sensationalism and division, creating a network of people inspired to contribute in their own ways. And if sometimes she found herself featured in the pages of that newspaper, highlighting her contributions to neighborhood projects or quoting her perspectives on community development, Eliza discovered that being seen wasn't as frightening as she had once believed. There was a quiet dignity in being recognized not for who she had been or what she had lost, but for who she was becoming, one small, meaningful action at a time. As they walked home together, now sharing an apartment in a renovated Victorian house just a few blocks from the park, Eliza reflected on how differently her life had unfolded than she had planned. The orderly, anonymous existence she had constructed after her divorce had given way to something messier, but infinitely richer. A life intertwined with others, shaped by shared purpose and mutual care. It had all begun with a simple choice: to stop and pick up what others had discarded, to take responsibility for a small corner of the world she inhabited. That choice had opened a door she hadn't known existed, leading her not just to Marcus, but to a community where she had found belonging, purpose, and, unexpectedly, home.